webinar today on the filing of POSH annual returns. Thank you for taking time out from your busy schedules and joining us today. I'm Shubhashri. I lead the Institute of Inclusion at Interweave, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Very pleased to welcome our very senior, seasoned subject matter experts today. So on the panel, we have Udaya Kumar and Nishant. Welcome, Udaya Kumar. Welcome, Nishant. Wonderful to have you here this morning. I'm going to quickly introduce both of them. I, of course, won't be able to do justice, so it's going to be a brief introduction. Udaya Kumar is a lawyer by profession with more than 20 years of experience focused on labor law consultancy and HR outsourcing operations. He brings a combination of domain expertise and also the ability to manage complicated operational requirements that large organizations, which are located in multiple locations, need to take care of to ensure labor law compliance. He has successfully established compliance practices and large-scale HR operations across sectors. So welcome to you, Udaya.
Pleasure's mine, Shubha. Thanks for such a nice introduction. Hi, everyone.
Great to have you here, Udaya. Now to introduce Nishant. Nishant is a senior associate at AZB and Partners, and he has a focus on employment law. He routinely advises on issues pertaining to all stages of the employment life cycle, including recruitment and hiring, employment documentation, human resource policies, remuneration and benefits, which includes stock-linked benefits, employee cessation, and other related intellectual property law and corporate law issues. He also supports clients in employee-related litigations and disputes and with their industrial and employee relations issues. He's advised on various types of disciplinary and harassment claims, including claims related to sexual harassment at the workplace. Pleased to have you here as well. A warm welcome to you, Nishant.
Thank you, Shubhashri. Happy to be here.
Great. So before we begin, just to quickly take all of you through the structure. So what we've done is we have a collection of the most frequently asked questions. And this is going to address some of the key aspects around the filing process. We talk about what, when, who, where, how, and covering most of the salient questions and aspects. During the course of our discussion on these questions, if any questions come to mind, please share them on chat, and we will pick them up during the session as well. And once we go through these frequently asked questions, we will have ample time at the end for all of you to come on camera or unmute yourself and ask any other specific questions that we may have missed out on. So as and when you have any questions, please type them in and we will address them either during the session or at the end. So that's going to be the structure of how we're going to take it forward today. So let's get started with, a very basic question. This goes out to you, Nishant. What is the POSH annual report and what is the purpose behind the filing of this report?
So, Shubhashri, this is great because it's a very basic and a fundamental question. Now, if you look at how the POSH Act came into existence itself, there was a significant need for a statutory remedy or a statutory process to redress claims of sexual harassment. Before the POSH Act, there was purely most sexual harassment claims were dealt with based on a Supreme Court judgment, the Vishaka judgment, based on which there was really specifically no statutory framework. There were best practices, etc. Now, what the POSH Act did was it codified a lot of requirements in relation to dealing with claims of sexual harassment, the manner in which they should be addressed. It's not a perfect legislation, but it is an attempt at getting there. And basically, the idea behind the annual report is, at least in our view and in general consensus, is that it's a way of monitoring the implementation of the act itself. Now, when you have an employer or an IC which is required to actually submit this report year on year, it helps the government to actually keep a track of cases of sexual harassment, how soon they're being redressed, and the potential consequences of this. And in my mind, this is valuable data because it's going to eventually, maybe at a later date, maybe now, it can be steps to further say, make the act better or to improve the manner in which complaints are addressed. So basically, to succinctly put it, it's a report which the internal committee is supposed to file, which captures their action in relation to sexual harassment for the past year.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nishant. That gave us a lot of clarity there. My next question goes out to you, Udaya. Nishant just mentioned that the IC members need to file these reports. So can you give us more clarity whether only IC members can file reports? Who actually needs to file this report? And is there any particular format in which the report needs to be filed? Udaya, we can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Hi. So yes, the IC member are the people who are obligated to file this annual report with the district officers. And having said that, there is a rule which is central rule for sexual harassment, under which Rule 14 prescribes what are the key ingredients to be there part of the report. Which could again, which contains of non-confidential informations, right? So it is number of complaints which have received or registered during an year, then number of complaints which is disposed of during an year, and how much are pending, and how many workshops you have done, and nature of actions, the actions which has been taken against the accused people or the people who have been found guilty of the POSH complaints. So this is the key ingredients. Again, having said that, there is no personal information or the name or anything being disclosed in the annual report. Annual report has to be filed by the employees, again, IC committee only, and to the district officer. No one else can have, because this information being very confidential in nature, no one are been given access to that.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification, Udaya. A lot of times clients wonder if somebody else from the central HR team can go and file the report and things like that. So this gives us a lot of clarity around the confidentiality aspect which is involved. So Nishant, the next question goes out to you. So when does this annual report have to be filed, and is there a cutoff date for reporting of cases?
So, Subhashri, there is a cutoff date. It's 31st of December. So you will consider only cases or actions which have occurred for the previous year. Now, when it actually comes to the timeline for filing, in fact, this is one of the major lacunas which the law had, especially since it has been introduced, because there was always this question of when should the annual filing be submitted, because it says as may be prescribed, the statute, but the rules really don't provide a date. So for the longest time, people just chose not to file it because they didn't know when they're supposed to file it. Now states have come up, certain states, I think like Maharashtra, except or Mumbai specifically, they have come up with certain dates. I think in Mumbai, at 1 year, they had provided time till August. I think it was last year. But the general best practice when it comes to filing an annual report is that you do it by Jan 31st, which is 1 month into the next year. And if you think about it, this is actually an adequate time frame to actually file complaints, given the comprehensiveness of the report, or to say the lack of comprehensiveness, because you don't really require information, or you don't really need to do some significant data mining to be able to file this report. So practically the best time to file it would be by the 31st of the next month. So you're well within the law. If a later date gets set, then it's always good. But 31st of Jan would be preferably the best time to file the annual report.
Thank you, Nishant. So not very far away in terms of timelines. Thank you for sharing that. We have a follow-up question from Preeti. So I'm asking this to Udaya. So can an outsourced partner who has signed an NDA with the company file the annual reports on behalf of the company?
In the sense, a compliance partner?
Yeah. So and a partner that you have outsourced, to help you with this, and if they've signed an NDA, can they file the report on your behalf?
Yeah, they can file on your behalf. Again, there is no confidential information being disclosed under that annual report, as I stated earlier. It is all non-confidential report only. Again, your complaints partner can go and file it on your behalf.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That gives us clarity there, Udaya. So where does the POSH report have to be filed? And also you mentioned a district officer, right?
Yeah.
Now, who is a district officer, and where do you go and submit this to him, and what is the process? If you can share some more insights on that.
See, every district has been assigned with a district officer who is primarily a magistrate of a respective district. It could be a commissioner, a class 1 magistrate rather. So it could be your commissioner of police, it could be your collector, or it could be your district magistrate court. So every district has been notified with a district officer. There is a vast list of it. And every unit or office establishment rather, which is under the jurisdiction of that particular district, have to submit this annual report with the respective district officer. They collate it and they send it to the state government or to the Ministry of Directorate of Women and Child Welfare Development.
Sure,
that is where it usually rolls up.
Yeah, thank you, Udaya. So we have another question here, which I am going to ask Nishant. So we have a question from Arun who says, if an organization has less than 10 headcount, do we still need to file the return?
So what the Act prescribes, Subhashri, is that basically either the internal committee or the local complaints committee, whichever is your local complaints committee, which has been established by the government, is required to submit this annual report. Now, the thing is, if you don't have 10 people, then you don't have an technically you won't have an IC under the Act, then in which case you could argue that there is no specific requirement. But what's a best practice for companies which don't have or are not required to constitute an internal complaints committee under the Act is to have a POSH policy still in place, so that at least employees are aware of what actions would constitute sexual harassment and they're aware of the statute, so that at a later point of time, if they even decide to scale up, employ more people, the organization itself is in a ready state.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nishant. I think that does give us a long-term perspective, saying that, we may be less than 10 today, but how do we kind of set up processes and the right kind of systems, keeping a forward-looking view in mind. Thank you for sharing that best practice there. Udaya, so coming back to you, when we talked about district officers, what if a district has no local officer in place? Then how does one do the filing? And is there a list of district officers that people can get access to and get more information on?
Okay, so there is no place where there is no district officer being assigned under POSH. Every district has a district officer. In failure to that, if you couldn't get the information of a district officer, the best place to submit the report would be the district magistrate.
Sure. Thank you, Udaya. And also, I just wanted to check with you if if people want to find out who the district officer is, how can they go about doing this? Is there any central repository where they can get this information?
There is no central repository for, unfortunately. Again, even the WCD department has not developed any repository district wise for it. Again, it is only a state level notifications, and you need to collate those repositories. We had collated some, and we have given a repository of it. Whatever we could manage to get, we have done it. Yes, the best practice would be to, again, as I stated earlier, where you couldn't find, you have to file it with the district magistrate. They will forward to the appropriate state government authorities.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks so much, Udaya, for that. Nishant, this question goes out to you. Often some of our clients reach out and say that they've missed filing for 1 or 2 years, and they want to go ahead and file the annual returns this year. But they want to know if there's going to be any penalty for the years that they've missed, and what can they do to correct this, and can they include the previous year's filing in this annual return? So this question is for you.
So, Subhashri, now the thing is, technically under the Act, there is a penalty if you breach any of the provisions or any of the rules, and filing an annual report is one of the rules. So technically speaking, there would be a penalty. Now, it's unlikely that action would be taken so long as you have displayed your bona fides, as in you've shown that this is purely, say, a procedural lapse on the part of the IC or the employer, but otherwise things have been taken care of. Complaints of sexual harassment have been redressed. It's not a hostile work environment. Employees feel safe. Now, in terms of making backdated filings with any labor authority or any filing, there's always a risk that it might get picked up for additional scrutiny. So what would be best is that you still go ahead and make the filing, at least for the past years as a separate filing, but you represent or you prepare a letter or a cover letter in such a way that you're displaying your bona fides. So that, I think, is a more important thing, because at the end of the day, it's important to look at the object of the act rather than the form of it. Now, if the object is to ensure a sexual harassment-free workplace, and you have been doing that, but you have lapsed in certain areas such as the annual filing, but you have sufficient data to show that everything else has been maintained or has been done, then I would think that the risk is slightly lower. But like I said, it's at the end of the day, you're making a filing to a government authority. Now, there is no real way of ruling out the fact that they might dig up this filing or choose to ask you questions on it. But I would say, at least going forward, it would be a best practice, and it's basically just righting a procedural wrong to that extent.
Absolutely. So you would advise that, they still give the cover letter and make sure that they file for the previous years.
Largely, that would be a general best practice, but it's important to look at the specific facts. Now, each organization is different. The kind of environment which an organization may have is different. And in a lot of cases, what we've seen is when it comes to organizations that may have just missed out filing the annual report, sometimes it's because the other framework has not been properly established at that point of time. So it would be a call that an organization would have to take based on its specific facts and circumstances. But best case scenario, everything is in order, everything is great, and you have sufficient data to show that you've done everything. I don't see a reason why you wouldn't want to show that you're compliant going forward, even if it means possibly submitting an annual filing late or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you, Nishan. That helps us. Udaya, this goes out to you. So we have a question from Pradeep here, and he says that employers are required to organize awareness programs at regular intervals for employees to sensitize them and to share the provisions of the Act. And also they are expected to do orientation programs for IC members. So can you, give us more clarity on this? And is this something that is mandatory? Is it something which is an annual process?
Yeah, so typically the state government recommends, WCD department recommends rather to have twice a year the employee awareness session, and quarterly as a meetup for conciliation, IC members. This is a meeting just to check whether what needs to be done, how they are progressing towards the cases, what is being done. So the primary agenda of the Act itself, legislation itself, if you see it, the first agenda is to prevention. So what are the prevention or the cautious method taken by an employer to prevent any sexual harassment at a workplace is the primary agenda. Then comes a redressal and other stuff. So in order to achieve that objective, it is essential to conduct on regular intervals. The intervals suggested by state government and WCD is 6 months once. And for IC also, the awareness program again for IC also is twice a year. So that is what it is. But IC are also recommended to meet every quarter and do a fresh up meeting or kind of a catch up meeting on what's going around and how cases have been dealt and discuss on all those stuff.
Sure. Thank you, Udaya. Just a further clarification there. So is this a recommendation or is this mandatory to do the sensitization sessions for employees twice in a year? And what do you see as best practice around it?
Twice in a year is a recommendation. There is no rules does not rules does not prescribe it has to be done twice, but rather they only say that you have to conduct on regular intervals, and that is suggested from WCD department.
Sure. And what would you suggest as a best practice? What is the frequency that organizations should look at for sensitization sessions?
See, sensitizing this to the employee level, again, 2 sessions a year would be suffice. But having said that, an online module would also be enough for employees now being at a position where all the employees are work from home. An online module be done and obligated to the employees to complete these modules and giving more sensitizations. And similarly, during an onboarding for every employees, let it be on during onboarding, given POSH should be one of the program at the time of induction. That would be my recommendation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Vidya, I think this is a very common question, and a lot of employers have this on their mind. So another question, just a follow-up to the conversation we were having earlier. So suppose organizations have no cases to file, Udya, must they still file a report? And if there are conciliations, should that go into the report?
Conciliation for I couldn't get the conciliation part. What kind of conciliations are doing for POSH conciliations you're asking?
Yeah. So we don't really have a case. There was a complaint, and a conciliation has been reached. Should that go into the report? And if there are no cases, do we still have to file a report?
Okay, coming to the first part, see, even if there is no cases, yes, it has to be reported. Again, that is the key objective of the legislation. And all of us, as even as socially responsible citizens, need to see 0 POSH cases across the nation. That is what is the place where we have to actually head ahead, right? So yes, even for 0 POSH cases, you need to file a report. And having said that, for conciliations, you may not require to be reported under the annual reports, because annual report needs to be filed only on the registered case and then pending cases and disposed of and action taken. So conciliations towards any POSH or providing a clarity on whether it could come under a POSH or not, those kind of conciliations may not come into the report.
Thank you, Udya. That gave us a lot of clarity there. The next question goes out to Nishant. So suppose there's a case still in progress as of 31st December. Should it fall into the current year filing, or do we only count it after the case is closed? We're not able to hear you, Nishant. If I can ask you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. So what I was saying is, when you consider the POSH Act in terms of other Indian labor legislation, most of other labor legislations are from the 1940s, 1950s. So it's a relatively new legislation. So there isn't too much clarity on this aspect, and things are still developing. But if you look at the way or the requirements under the rules itself, it's been broken down specifically into the number of complaints which you filed in, which the IC has received in a year, the number of cases which have been disposed of, the number of cases which are pending for more than 90 days, etc. So if you look at it this way, then if a case gets filed before 31st of December, technically you will have to say that it's a complaint which has been filed in this year. You will not show it as a case which has been closed and moved on, but it will still be a case which has been filed in this year. So strictly reading the requirements under the rules, that is a view that which organizations should probably take.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Nishant. We have a question for you, Udya from Sakshi. So she says, if a company has various places of business in India and every office has more than 10 employees, will the company still need to file the report separately for each office, or can it just be done at the entity level?
Yeah, I just answered to the similar question asked by Kasturi or someone, I guess. So yes, Kasturi Gaur, yeah, we have to file it on every establishment wise to the respective district alone. So even if you see constitution of IC, they are mandated to be done for every unit wise again, if not possible, if you don't have that much number of member to constitute an IC, female members, then in such case, a combo of all units together to form an IC is possible, but filing of report every district wise, establishment wise, you have to file it up.
Thank you, Udaya. And a couple of follow-up questions there. Will anything change if the headquarters is based out of India?
If anything will change?
In terms of, the way we file, suppose there are a number of entities within India, but the headquarters is not based in India, it's outside of India. So will anything change then?
No, nothing will change, irrespective of whether the headquarter is a global organization which is in Western continent or anywhere. But since we have an establishment here, that is what has been taken into consideration. So every establishment, though being headquartered abroad or anywhere, but for any establishment which is registered either under any of the applicable legislation, be it shops and establishment or factory or mines, whatever it is, it will have an applicability of POSH Act, and they have to file a returns here. And a follow-up question which came from Kasturi was whether we need to file a return even if there is no women employees deployed in an entity. Yes, of course. It is not a gender-specific legislation like what we have for a Maternity Benefit Act. It kinds of covers all workplaces, and it is not that only an employee can be subjected to sexual harassment. Even a customer or a client or any of your housekeeping staff, anyone could be subjected to this kind of harassments. And yes, that also has to be dealt with. And that's the reason it is not something where even only if it is women employees are engaged, you need to have a POSH committee. No, that's not it.
Sure. Last follow-up question to that, Udaya. So suppose an organization has multiple offices, but within the same city. Can they file together? Can they bunch them up and file them together? Or do we again have to file separately for each of the offices?
Answer to that would be again how the offices are kind of situated or located. If the offices within a city comes under the same district, yes, you can have a combo report and you can file it to the district officer. But say suppose, let us take for Delhi, if there are two different district offices for Delhi North one and Delhi South someone else, then it has to be two different reports.
Sure. Thanks, Udaya. Quite a lot of questions for you there. Over to you, Nishant. So are the compliance requirements different for different types of companies? So, do startups and SMEs fall into the same category as big companies?
So, Subhashree, under the POSH Act, there's no real difference, as in it doesn't differentiate based on whether you're a startup. The requirements are same across all establishments. Like Udaya had said, whether you're a factory, a mine, or a commercial establishment, you would have to adhere to the Act. Where there may be a slight difference is if you're a company. Now, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, what they require is now that you also, the directors as part of their director's report also basically affirm the fact that they complied with the POSH Act and have taken adequate measures. So that may be an additional compliance, but solely based on either the size or the type of company, whether it's say a legacy company or a startup, is not really going to matter when it comes to compliance with the POSH Act.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And also, many times the smaller companies often lack resources in terms of senior women within the company. And this gives us a number of challenges. So is it possible for, companies which lack resources to retain senior women beyond 3 years as presiding officer? And how can this concern be dealt with?
So, Subhashree, again, I think this is a twofold issue. The first one is solely related to the POSH Act when it comes to senior women employees. The second one is in terms of just general diversity. It means that the organization itself is not going to be very diverse. So those are two things which have to be addressed, maybe addressed separately. Now, the POSH Act does provide for a certain framework when it comes to engaging a presiding officer, where it basically says that if you don't have a presiding officer for your establishment who's a senior woman employee, then the employer can use a senior female employee from another establishment or from another branch of the same employer. Basically, you use it, I mean, you try and appropriate resources from another establishment. So that's what the act allows for. So if someone has basically overrun that term, then you could potentially look at that. But the larger question is that organizations should look at increasing diversity when it comes to even if it just comes down solely to having more women employees so that they can take up this role. But the short answer is, again, the objective of the act is to ensure that there is prevention of sexual harassment and redressal of complaints of sexual harassment. So if you don't have anyone, you would have to take the next best option. There is no other go, as in you can't choose not to constitute a committee because you don't have, say, a senior female employee at the establishment who's no longer in the term or she's already served her term. Now, we're yet to see if these will be technicalities which may be picked up by courts, but just using, say, beneficial interpretation or looking at the objective behind the act, I think that's the route which commercial establishments would have to take. If you have no one else, then you can continue with the same person. At least that shows your bona fides in terms of redressing complaints of sexual harassment.
Sure, thanks, Nishant. A follow-up question here. Suppose there are no full-time women employees, but there's a female contract employee. Can that person be appointed as a presiding officer?
So again, if when you're talking about a contract employee, it depends whether this employee is, say, under employment law considered a contract worker or an employee of a third-party person who is deployed at your establishment to carry out work. If that's the case, then it's highly recommended that she not be held as the presiding officer because technically she's not your employee. Now, if you're looking at employees who are, say, on a fixed-term contract, meaning you employ someone for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years, then it should be fine to have a fixed-term employee as a presiding officer because at the end of the day, the employee is still an employee of the organization.
Sure, thanks, Nishant. Changing gears here, Udaya, a question for you. So what is this She Box? Why has it been set up? And is it mandatory for organizations to register in the She Box portal?
See, She Box is primarily for women employees to go and register their POSH complaint, right? That's the agenda. So even a individual female can go and register a complaint in the She Box. That is the objective of bringing it. Who kind of hesitates to go even to the organization and report it, or probably not in a situation or doesn't have an access to office or laptops and other places where she could go and raise it, or for any reason. Could be a boss who would have asked them to restrict her access to everything, and she may not be allowed inside an office also. So this is a place where she can go and register her complaints. And having said that, places like Maharashtra and a few other states, I think Haryana and other places, have come out with mandatory registration of establishments in under their WCD portal, which is primarily developed only for POSH compliance, and also to upload the order of constitution of IC members, and again reconstitutions of again after 3 years, their details, their contact numbers as well, so that in case of any complaint which comes through the She Box or an online portal, the IC also could be reached through the WCD department, and then it could be addressed in an appropriate manner. And also now there how it is going ahead is everything under POSH also may come one day with complete online returns and everything like that. So what again, for other labor law complaints are happening, similarly even POSH returns and other things may come into online, and basically it's a data collection to monitor and have all controls and these things in the place. That's it.
Sure. Thanks for that clarification, Udya. So a follow-up question to that, if organizations find that individual employees have gone ahead and, they've registered some cases on the SheBox portal, should they make sure that, they deal with those cases and account for them in the annual report?
Yeah, they need to obviously account for it, and they need to register it as a complaint, whatever the source may be. Again, it's an employee. Again, the complaint is under sexual harassment POSH in nature. An employer is obligated to again take from the source and again inquire and uh, redress it in an appropriate manner.
Thank you. We have a question here from Arun. So this goes out to you, Nishant. Does the policy need to be made available in physical form? Does it need to be in local language also, other than English?
So now, so long as employees, say, if it's a tech company and they have access to, say, an intranet where the policy is maintained and everyone's aware that there is a policy which has been maintained, then I don't see too much of a requirement to have it in a physical form. But if, say, you're an establishment where most of your employees won't have access to the computers, etc., you're carrying out other forms of work, then it's best to have a physical policy. It may be also recommended to provide that policy as part of onboarding when you give them their offer letter so that employees are aware of it. Again, when you look at whether it should be in English or in the local language, it's important to look at the objective of the act. Now, if employees cannot read English, then it is best that to the extent possible, you provide these documents in vernacular so that employees are aware of their rights. And this would also tie into the whole requirement under the act of conducting workshops and organizing workshops to actually educate and sensitize employees towards sexual harassment.
Sure. Thank you, Nishant. And another question for you here. So, Arun says support staff do not have access to the intranet and even contract staff. So, what do you suggest is the best practice to, share the act with them?
So when it comes to support staff, it's very important that support staff also be included as part of all these organizational workshops and educational activities when it comes to sensitization for sexual harassment. So it's very important that that occurs. Now, at the end of the day, the policy is something which you will have on a piece of paper, but when it comes to, and at least this is something which organizations would know, there are a lot of people who don't really read the policies. So especially when it comes to, say, support staff or contract workers, it's important to build in support mechanisms so that they are aware of their rights, which means maybe conducting specialized POSH workshops for your support staff in such a manner that they don't feel, say, at a disadvantage if you're conducting a workshop with the rest of your employees because of socioeconomic differences, etc., which are unfortunate realities which people should keep in mind, because this is something that should be addressed. So it's important that you, if you're not in a position to actually have policies specifically or educate employees, or say if you have employees who are unable to read and write, etc., then it's important that the employer build up other support mechanisms so that they are aware of their rights. So I would say that if you have support staff, ensure that they're trained, they attend workshops to the extent possible, and if required, have additional or separate workshops for your support staff so that they don't feel uncomfortable having to attend it, say, with their managers, etc. When it comes to contract workers, what's very important is that as part of your contract with the contractor who is deploying contract workers to you, it's very important that you ensure that they take certain steps. Now, most IT companies, when they engage with contract workers, they're going to have built-in clauses around confidential information saying that you require the people you deploy here to maintain confidentiality. I would say go steps further and say that the contractor will take steps to ensure that people who are deployed are aware of the POSH Act. The contractor has a POSH policy in place. Now, the fundamentals of the policy are not going to vary from establishment to establishment, because what it seeks to basically prohibit are universal. So at least ensure that your members are educated. Now, if they don't have access to the intralinks, in most cases, what happens is when contractors come on board, they are given some form of, as in some, I won't say a welcome package, but they're given some documentation. And to that extent, try and include a policy as part of that.
Sure, that gives a lot of clarity there. Thank you, Nishant. Udaya, this is a question for you. So Chitranjan says, we keep getting emails from Karnataka State Commission for Women asking us to send a report on whether we have organized POSH awareness programs. And they also ask us to use a presentation and share the presentation and document around the POSH Act that we use within the organization. So is it required to report this information with them?
Okay. See, first thing we need to see whether the mail ID which they have given here, posh.ks cw@gmail.com, whether it's a genuine one or this. Because let me tell you, there is a couple of other things going around the POSH report and other stuff, is that now the WCD department have kind of gone ahead and started giving trainings for external fraternities or an individual who could kind of take up the role of a presiding officer, or who could be a faculty for conducting these kind of awareness programs and other stuff. And they're promoting these kind of activities. And people who have been kind of empaneled, the list of empaneled members are also there in the portal, specifically when it comes to Karnataka. And they have started now reaching ahead to the employers, whoever are registered. So to the employers, stating that, have you given a training? And if it is so, then please let us know, or else again, they are ready to give that and do these ventures. So that is one thing which is going ahead. But yes, report, if it is a the mail ID seems to be genuine in the portal, yes, we can go ahead and submit the report. There is no harm in it. But again, having said that, the rules does not prescribe you to go and submit the presentation document and other stuff. It is not a mandatory. You can give a divulge how many numbers of that has been given, and if at all they come for an inspection, you can establish stating that where the when was the date when this kind of trainings or awareness programs are conducted. And it could be by any mode, it could be from a third party. So eventually it is not required that an employer needs to have a presentation deck or something around it, right? So you can always have a policy that's more than sufficient, and constitution of IC and other stuff is required. No deck or these things to be given. Again, sharing of the information of awareness programs given to IC members or employees, a mere register is enough when it was conducted, or record any by way of any records. If you can substantiate that, then that is sufficient.
Thank you there, Udaya. So Nishant, we have a question which is a follow-up to an earlier thread that we were discussing. So Preeti says, in the absence of any senior women in a small company, can a senior female HR consultant who's on retainer with the company be designated as presiding officer? Such a person is, however, not on the rolls of the company.
Preeti, the thing is, again, the Act now provides for a very specific framework for technically constituting an internal committee, which basically says that either it's a senior woman employee from your establishment, or basically a senior woman employee from another establishment of the same employer. Now, solely looking at it on that basis, it may not, I mean, having a third party or a consultant sit as your presiding officer may not be treated as may not fulfill the requirements under the Act per se. But then again, I would think that you again follow up behind the objective of forming the Act. Now, if you don't have anyone, rather than actually going into, say, a consultant, try and look at your group companies. It's possible that you may be able to deploy someone from a group company to come in and sit as your presiding officer, which does occur. Or see if the presiding officer can be someone else at the establishment, maybe not someone senior, but someone who's well informed about the Act and the requirements, and has the say temperament, etc., to conduct such investigations. So if there's another woman employee at the establishment, you can look at that. And if all that else fails, then at least have a presiding officer who will be able to conduct such cases, etc., in addition to your external member. So you fulfill the criteria, but not completely. I mean, again, at the end of the day, when you're looking at compliance, there's a fixed rule for compliance. But if you're not able to meet that, I would say at least try the next best thing, because the importance is the objective of the act. And if complaints are getting redressed adequately, at this point of time, that should be sufficient.
Sure. Thank you, Nishant. I think that was very helpful there. Udyag, a question for you here. So have there been any recent amendments that POSH administrators should be aware of, and how can people stay updated with any changes or amendments or any requirements that the district officer has asked for? Is there any central place that people can go to, and what is your suggestion on this?
No, as I said earlier, unfortunately, we don't have anything centralized for all the district officers and people giving certain requirements. So, yeah, but obviously, in case of any requirement or a rule or a framework, the district officers have been given a leverage to jot down their own framework in how they have to seek a compliance data or anything. So they have been given that powers in the act. And to do that, obviously, they have to notify it to the respective jurisdictional establishments by way of notifications. Then it could be done. The right place as of now, what I would suggest where you can get maximum information would be the state Department of Women and Child Development. That is a place where you can kind of every website you can go and verify and collect any information. If at all there is any particular notification or format prescribed by the district officer of a respective jurisdiction. Again, jurisdiction wise they don't do it, but again state wise, yes, there might be some requirement which may change from one or the other. A simple example would be Haryana state, where they kind of ask to give little more information with the dates of when this awareness programs were conducted, how many people have participated. These are the details which even they ask a part of the annual report. So those kind of things may be prescribed, but again you need to take from the state website.
Sure, I think that was extremely useful there. Thank you, Udya. So Nishant, we have a question for you. For employees on contracts such as housekeeping and security, is the obligation of sensitization and awareness building on the direct employer or on the principal employer who is signed up these contract employees?
So technically what the act says is the employer's requirement to conduct such trainings and workshops. So if it is your contract workers, technically you could argue that it would be their employer who's required to conduct these sensitizations and workshops, etc. So a good way to build this in, like I said, is in your contract with the contractor to say that anyone who's being deployed is sensitized and you have conducted workshops from time to time. But there is no real harm in actually involving these workers as part of POSH presentations or POSH workshops. So technically speaking, it would be the contractor's requirement to fulfill these workshops, but there is no harm. And in fact, it may be even a best practice so that you ensure that the level of detail which is being covered is sufficient, because it might be possible that you can't really monitor the kind of workshops or sensitization drives which a contractor is conducting. So to that extent, you could also look at doing this. And there's per se no real prohibition from this, at least from a POSH perspective. So that would be the short answer. It would be the contractor's obligation, and ensure that if you're not doing it, that contractually the contractor is obligated to do it.
Sure, thank you for that, Nishant. A question for you, Udya. Is there any timeline or SLA prescribed for closure of POSH cases?
So POSH cases, yes, there is a timeline which is prescribed. Again, within 90 days, you have to completely close the cases. And in case of anything going beyond, again, there needs to be a relevant reason for any extension. There might be someone who would have, the person whom we have supposed to try is not within the country or something, anything could be possible, right? So yes, but we need to kind of see that it does not extend beyond 120 days is what they say.
Sure. Thank you. And a follow-up question to that is, can the IC team delegate the investigation to some other subject matter expert?
No,
Suppose they don't, they're not getting the members to come on time and they're not able to complete the process in time. Can they get any external support for this?
no. Only the anything which is related to POSH has to be dealt only by the IC members. If not, if the IC members are not in a position to uh, convene together and conduct the proceeding, then the alternate would be to reconstitute the IC total. But you need to kind of ensure that only IC members deal with the POSH complaints.
Thank you for that, Udaya. Now I have a question for both of you. I'll start with Nishant. So Nishant, how severe are the consequences of non-compliance? If you don't file the report. We can't hear you.
Again, I left my mic on mute. Sorry for that. So the act itself penalizes non-compliance with a fine of up to 50,000 for the first offense. And then if there's a later offense, the fine can be doubled up to the maximum of what the first fine was, twice of that. And if there is significant, say, non-compliance, the act also provides a penalty of cancellation of business licenses. Now, we haven't seen this happen till date in terms of cancellation of business licenses, etc. But there is a penalty which can be imposed, which for the first non-compliance would possibly be up to 50,000.
Sure, thanks, Nishant. Udaya, do you want to comment on that? What, in your experience, have been some of the consequences that you have seen of non-compliance?
See, non-compliance, yes, obviously, we have seen a couple of establishments who have missed out in certain aspects and been penalized for it. Again, some being warned and left only with warning aspects. Majorly, what we have noticed, where does an employer miss out is not on annual reports. Annual reports, wherever you have an IC, they do it. But only due to some misconception or miss out, what we have seen in our past is people do not reconstitute or they lapse the period of 3 years reconstitution of IC. This happens and usually comes out only by way of an audit findings. That is one thing which we have been kind of noticing in past years. And similarly, one of the question which was asked by the participants here, whether it applies to even establishment where we have no female employees. We have seen establishments which have more than 10 or 15 and other head counts as well. But since there is no female employees, they say POSH Act does not apply to us and they do not even constitute a IC. Again, they couldn't constitute an IC as well. So those kind of situations we have seen, and yes, they have been penalized with penalties, and a couple of them have been again left as a warning, and they have asked to comply. That's the whole.
Thank you, Udaya. There's a follow-up question to a thread we were talking about earlier in terms of IC members. So the question from Arun here is that if there is a change in IC members, does this need to be approved by the board of directors every time? And can existing members themselves approve the change?
So the constitution of IC is on the employer, and a constitution order needs to be pasted in place, conspicuous place where everyone can have an access to that who are the IC members and the contact details and their again mail IDs where you have to reach out. And this constitution, since it is from an employer, when it comes to a company, then it has to be from the by way of BR only.
Sure, thank you, Udaya. Nishant, this is a question for you. So we, currently are looking at the current workplace, which is virtual in some cases, hybrid in some cases, and so on. So what are some changes that you're seeing, and what is it that you would like the audience to know specific to this context?
So, Subhashri, now when it comes to, especially given the pandemic, excuse me, a lot of organizations have taken to say remote working, working from home, etc. Now, the obligation when it comes to POSH, one thing to keep in mind is it extends even if employees are working remotely. I mean, there can be different forms of harassment, including, say, harassment through the internet, things like that. And so that's one thing which organizations should keep in mind. Your obligations as an employer even extends to your employees who are working remotely or working from home. It's important that they be protected and a mechanism be there for them to redress complaints of sexual harassment. Now, some of the challenges which we've seen when it comes to, say, virtual inquiries or virtual hearings by the IC is a lot of times now that many people are working from home, there's more of a difficulty in trying to get people to come and attend these meetings. And it's not only the respondent in this case, it can even be the complainant. Many times people are working from home with their family. They don't want to be part of an investigation when they have family members walking around where they have to describe very unfortunate incidents, etc. So there is some level of hesitation which has been built in. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have seen cases now where parties to the inquiry itself, especially when they're being conducted virtually with no real ability to monitor the other person, they end up recording some of these inquiries and then using this either to blackmail or to disparage the other person, releasing it or threatening to release it on social media. So when it comes to conducting inquiries virtually, there is a bit of a risk that organizations should keep in mind. So to the extent possible, it's always best that these inquiries be conducted physically. There's also the ability to monitor empathy, tone, tenor, etc., which are important when it comes to an investigation, especially if it's an investigation into sexual harassment. Also, the complainant needs to be comforted that her claim or her complaint is being adequately redressed. She's comfortable enough to describe whatever detail needed by the IC to make a determination, and she's not really afraid of retaliation. So these are some of the things which organizations should keep in mind, especially when conducting, I'd say, inquiries in relation to sexual harassment virtually. To the extent possible, an encrypted source of a video con should be used, where there's one person who's the host, preferably the presiding officer, who allows only these two people to join and then specifically prohibits access to everyone else. Employees are informed that they're not allowed to record any of this. Now, breaching confidentiality in relation to a POSH complaint is a violation of the act in itself, but employees need to know this, and they need to know that they will face consequences when it comes to this. Now, if your offices aren't open, try and organize a physical meeting, at least at, say, a third-party premise. It can be a shared workspace which has sufficient, say, a room where a hearing can be conducted. And even if you have two IC members who are present and the rest are joining virtually, so long as the complainant or the respondent, as the case may be, are present, that still negates a lot of risk. Now, if it's being done virtually, I would say some of the steps to look at is you ensure that your policy clearly describes the fact that remote working employees can also make claims or file complaints of sexual harassment while they're remote working. Your obligation to adhere to these requirements don't end because you leave the workplace. You have sufficient technological support or sufficient technology to be able to conduct these meetings in a secure and confidential manner, and your ICC is trained to be able to conduct these meetings. You wouldn't want, say, IC members to be feeling that they are virtual, so there is no requirement to actually pay the level of attention that they need to. You don't want a complainant to feel that her side of the story is not being adequately heard, or a respondent to feel that their story is not, or their side of the story is not being adequately heard, or there has been injustice done to another party. So these are some of the things which should be kept in mind.
Thank you so much for that, Nishant. Tootya, anything you would like to add specifically also around, the documentation and doing the process online if, there is a lockdown, or there's limited access to be able to go and physically hand over the report and so on?
See, that was a case for when the first wave of the pandemic was there, and people could not kind of do lot of returns. But having said that, it never impacted on POSH because the first wave came much after the timeline for your returns and other things. Yes, uh, dealing with the complaints and other stuff could have been a position there for any complaint to be dealt within the stipulated period. And yes, the online or virtual handling of complaints can also be done by the IC members, and the recordings can be done. Only thing is you need to keep the members or participants there informed that you are going to record the session for the purpose of substantiating what it has happened. Uh, yes, but online submission for reports under POSH for all the locations is not a case which is there, but there are mail IDs which are there for every district offices, which you can mail it for if at all you are not in a position to go and get their physical acknowledgement. And we have also seen that wherever they have done a virtual or mail submissions, in case of any lacuna in the report or any insufficient data, the district officers also come back and with certain requirements and submit the revised reports. Yeah, that is a doable thing.
Sure, thank you for that, Udaya. We have a question here which says that what is meant by employer? Can the appointment of IC members be approved by the CEO, HR, CFO, or Chief Compliance Officer?
Okay, so the employer, again, you need to go by the pure definition of employer under the Act only. So the employer under the Act in relation to any department, organization, or undertaking, establishment, enterprise, institution, office, branch, and all goes. But who does it is again who is the head of the institution or organization, who has an ultimate control, and they are known to be a employer. So when it comes to your company, then it would be your director, CEO. Again, when it comes to a proprietorship, then it's your individual owner. When it's an enterprise, then yeah, the head of the unit which is there, then they will be the respective employer.
Sure, thank you. Another question here, Nishant, this goes to you. This is from Ramya. It says, is there any material or reference which we can share with employees which can enhance their awareness apart from the regular sensitization sessions that we conduct, and can we get access to something like this?
So, Subhasri, there's really.
She has also, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So she has also come out with the WCD department website. Yes, that's the right website. There you can find a tab for women-related legislation, and there are prototype employee handbooks being made for sexual harassment. What could amount to sexual harassment? What kind of act would amount to sexual harassment? What would not? When it can be reported? When people need to be? Whether people need to be silent? What kind of redressal they have? All those things have been made as a prototype, and they've kept handy in the website. It's in downloadable PDF format, so you can obviously go ahead and take it.
Yeah, and like I was saying now, apart from if you're conducting sensitizations and workshops and you already have policies, etc., in place, there are guidances which are there, but there's, I mean, per se, your workshops and your awareness training should be sufficient to sensitize employees. And if you have a sufficiently comprehensive policy in place, that should be sufficient. So there's per se nothing additional which an employer has to provide, so long as the training mechanism and the policy are in place. Now, if an organization chooses to rely or doesn't have its own policy, etc., in place, or its own handbook, then, like Udaya said, you can always rely on the sources which have been given by the Women and Child Department. But the short point is, if you have ensured that all your compliances are in place, there's really nothing additional apart from that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you there, Udaya and Nishant. Poonam has a follow-up question. Udaya, if you can answer this. If you can again share the website where we can get the handbooks. We can't hear you, Udaya.
Sorry, I have shared it to Rima. I'll share it to everyone. Ramya, sorry. I'll share it to
Yeah.
Ramya. This is the place where.
Thank you so much. This question goes to you, Nishant. So we've, had a very rich discussion. We may have a few more questions as well. But before that, are there any good practices that you have come across that organizations are implementing that you would like to share with this group?
So one of the now we've seen that organizations have started to leverage technology quite a bit when it comes to sensitization. So this is generally cost effective. So in terms of conducting your workshop or your sensitization, at least given that it may not be possible to conduct these workshops every time an employee is onboarded, a lot of organizations are choosing to have the sensitization have done either through online means, or there are like videos which have been created to sensitize employees who join employment as part of their induction, which they're supposed to watch and then fill in and answer questions at the end of it to show that they've understood. So this is something which is very good, and it's good to use this in addition to your regular workshops, which might be conducted say twice a year or thrice a year based on frequency, so that everyone who's onboarded is aware of this, of the requirement to adhere to the POSH policy, and also the kind of acts which may be considered as sexual harassment. Apart from this, another good practice is to have a frequency when it comes to training, and also to engage people who themselves are trained to make make POSH trainings. Because it's very easy to say that you've conducted a workshop by putting slides together, but it's important that employees feel the impact of this training or the sensitization. So I would tell our listeners to basically ensure that the people who are training make sure that their credentials are good, so that at the end of the day, employees benefit. Don't treat this requirement of conducting workshops as just a check in the box. At the end of the day, it's going to have a real world impact on your organization. Apart from this, another good practice is to create some form of separate policy or handbook for your IC, so that even if they are coming in and going out, in addition to the basic trainings which they will receive, they're also aware of how they're supposed to conduct investigations. Now, there are a lot of sensitivities involved when it comes to conducting investigations in relation to sexual harassment. It's important that tone and tenor be kept in mind. It's important that the complainant be made to feel that it's a safe environment. So it's important that your IC is fully equipped to handle these situations. So that's another portion which I would suggest that employers focus on. In addition to empowering employees, it's also important to facilitate and empower the IC to be able to conduct a fruitful investigation to eventually reach the goal of say eliminating sexual harassment at the workplace. And the last thing I would say is, just from time to time, based on changing business circumstances, now everyone's going back to work, so remote working may potentially reduce. But like when the pandemic hit, it's important that at that point of time to remind employees that they still have a right to file complaints, even if say harassment is occurring outside of the workplace, but it is considered still to be as part of work, etc. So I would say that these are a couple of things which organizations should keep in mind.
Thank you. Some very great insights there. Thank you, Nishant. Udaya, would you like to add some good practices that you have seen in your experience?
See, one thing is now, see, we have come way ahead for this legislation when it comes to POSH compliances. So it took at least 2 decades for us to first come out with the legislation framework for POSH after the incidents of Vishaka and everything have been reported, and then we came after this legislation. And I somehow wonder a lot of people again coming back and asking time and again that we do not have so many women employees to constitute a IC. We do not have number of senior women employees. We do not. We have less women employees or kind of things. See, those days have gone. We have again after the execution of this legislation, which has come to effective in way back in 2013, we are again one decade going to be completed. Yes, people should think about on the diversified hirings. People need to hire equivalent women, and the days are not far when it's going to have the governments are going to obligate every employer to hire mandatory diversified employee population. So if you see for government organizations now, the right for a person with disability has a mandatory hiring of 5%, which could again obligate even private employers very soon. Similarly for women or again transgenders, other genders, and again for people who have been deprived of HIV, all these legislations will kind of make employer obligate one day or the other to hire with the diversified population, which is kind of a welcome move though. Again, so I think people should kind of get away with that old mindset of having only male being suitable for certain jobs, or certain sect of people who only can carry this kind of skill set. When women are hired in army, and what else they can't do, right? So that should be the mindset, and probably people should go ahead of that, and they need to do this. That's so.
Thank you for sharing, Udya, and also for bringing our attention to the fact that we shouldn't be looking at this just as compliance and keeping the bigger picture in view in terms of while it is compliance to some extent, but also what can we do as employers to improve our workplaces, whether it's in terms of making them more respectful or diverse. So thank you for sharing those perspectives. We still have a few more questions here, so I'm going to ask them. This one is for you, Nishant. Hina says, does the IC committee have to be separately set up for a factory and the office of a company where the administration unit is the same?
So again, it depends on where these establishments are located. Now, if it's one employer and they're right next to each other, and you're just saying that it's possibly one is a commercial establishment and one is a factory, they form in the same compound. It may be possible to have, say, an IC for both together, or a combined IC. But on a strict reading again of the act, it says based on each establishment and each branch. So if you do have people, then constitute a separate IC. But if you don't, then it's okay to have one for both of them.
Sure. Thanks, Nishant. So, Udya, we have a couple of questions for you here. The annual return, is it for the financial year or the calendar year, January to December?
It's for calendar year.
And do we need to change the external member in the IC every year? This is a question from Rakhi.
Yeah, I have responded to that every 3 years.
Every 3 years. Thank you. So I think we've addressed most of the questions that we've received from the audience, and also gone through the list of frequently asked questions that we had prepared. I'm now opening it up to any further questions from the audience. If we have inadvertently missed any of the questions you had asked earlier, or if there's anything else that you would like to ask, please go ahead. You can raise your hand and do that. Kasturi, would you like to ask your question?
Hello. Yes. So this is a bit of digression. Uday, since you spoke about inclusion, so it just triggered. So is it mandatory for an organization to have a standalone equal employment opportunity policy? Say if our website says that we are an equal employment opportunity employer, and if our offer letter also has that clause, is it still important to have a standalone policy, or is it a good to have thing?
See, earlier it was not a mandatory document to have, but having said that, post implementation or effectiveness of right for person with disability, this has become an obligation for every employer to have a equal opportunity policy and have that one in your place. And if you have a website, then it should be part of your website as well.
Okay, okay. Thank you
And
so much.
every state has a commissioner for person with disability who kind of approves this policy, to whom it has to be run through, and those people have to from the directorate have to approve it and do it. Delhi does a proper approval formalities of these policies as well.
Okay,
And
thank you so much.
just to add to what they were saying, now in a lot of instances, what we've seen is that organizations have, say, they use a global equal opportunity policy, which they extend to India as well. And if you're doing this, what's important to keep in mind is that the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act has certain requirements when it comes to an equal opportunity policy. So long as these requirements are captured as part of your global framework, it should be fine to run with that. But like Udaya said, you have to file this policy with a commissioner, your local disabilities commissioner. So a lot of organizations which we are seeing generally prefer not to put out their full policy, especially given that it may be scrutinized with by a government official. So they generally tend to prefer to have a separate equal opportunity policy for the purposes of the Disabilities Act.
Okay, thank you, Nishant. That was very useful. Thank you, Uday, once again.
Thank you all. We have another question from Mahesh Garg. Mahesh, would you like to ask the question?
Hello, everyone. I just want to know how to file online the return.
Of which one? POSH return you're asking?
Post return, yeah.
See, POSH return filing is not made online for most of the states. States like Haryana and Maharashtra have come out with that. They have a website where you can register and reports could be uploaded. But for other states, some states come out with the district officers detail of mail IDs where you can submit the scanned reports, and other places it's still manual.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Udaya. Any further questions from the audience? I know we've kind of, looked at it from all possible angles. Okay, I guess we don't. So thank you so much. I want to start by saying thank you to our panelists today, Udaya and Nishant. It's been a fairly long discussion, very in-depth, very useful and insightful. And thank you so much for taking part in this today and sharing your deep experience and insights with all of us here today. Also, I want to thank the support team at Interweave, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. Radhika, Leka, Mitch, all of them who are here today. And thank you to the participants for, asking so many questions and contributing to such a rich discussion today. Do reach out to any of the panelists or any of us if you'd like to know more about the work that we do in this field. So thank you so much, and have a great day and a relaxing weekend. Thank you again, Nishant and Udaya.
Thank you. Thank you all. Pleasure is ours. Thank you.
Thank you.